Hey guys, it's Miss Creepfall, just coming in to give you guys the notes here so you can work on your worksheet. Sorry I haven't been there the past few days, but I've been feeling a little under the weather. I have the flu, and I'm not really sure what day I'm going to come back, so I'm going to try to do these notes as best I can, and then I'll leave you guys to the homework, the investigating chemical energy. So we kind of talked about ATP a little bit back in photosynthesis. We didn't really get into it as much as I would have liked to, but that's because its place is in respiration, and we'll talk more about it during this unit. So energy from organisms. So think back to cells, and what organelle was the main one that we needed, or that was able to give us energy, the powerhouse of the cell? Hopefully all of you guessed that right. It's the mitochondria. So where does it come from? It comes from the mitochondria. Plants are called autotrophs, A-U-T-O-T-R-O-P-H-S, because they make their own food. So auto is like your own, making your own food. Animals are called heterotrophs because they obtain energy from other organisms. So with plants, we talked about photosynthesis, converting light energy into chemical energy to make their own foods. But for this, we're going to be talking about animals. We have to get our energy from other organisms. That would be pretty cool if we could do photosynthesis, but unfortunately we can't. So we must rely on other organisms such as plants and other animals to get our energy. So all living things use glucose for energy. Just like with photosynthesis, they made glucose, and because of making glucose, that was their source of energy. Now, same thing for us, we must get glucose for energy. So every time we go to eat, remember glucose is sugar, that's where we get our energy from. We get our energy from that. Now, a lot of people get a little confused with this, but I want you guys to kind of think about this like it's like Chuck E. Cheese. So glucose is our energy. When we take that glucose in and we eat our food, that energy gets converted into a usable form of energy. So that way it can work with a whole bunch of different chemical equations and reactions within our body. So with Chuck E. Cheese, when you go, you have your money, but you can't just put your money in the machines. You have to change them into coins. And then those coins are a usable form for all the games, and that's what allows you to play your games. So similar, we take in glucose, it's like the money, and then it has to be converted into coins at Chuck E. Cheese, and for us it gets converted into ATP. And ATP is the most usable form of energy, and that is what's going to allow us to start chemical reactions within our body. And we saw that with photosynthesis as well. Okay, so what exactly is this ATP? Its full name is adenosine triphosphate. And there's three main building blocks that you need to know about these. We have adenine, and that's when we talked about DNA. Adenine was one of the nitrogen bases. We have a 5-carbon sugar, it's ribose, and then 3 phosphates. So tri meaning 3 phosphates. And then adenosine is the adenine and the ribose. So here's a picture here. We have our 5-carbon sugar. We have our adenine and our 3 phosphate groups. So that is ATP. Here it is in the actual molecular formula. So you can see all the different elements that make up ATP. Now as far as what you guys need to know, there will be some questions on the investigating chemical energy that ask you to add these up and things like that. But as far as like the actual test and what you'll need for homework, you just need to know the 3 main things that ATP consists of, which is the 3 phosphate groups, the ribose, and the adenine. Okay, so before we move on to the next one, I know a lot of people were asking me questions. They're like, I get how the NADPH forms. Let's go back to photosynthesis for a little bit. They're like, how did ADP go to ATP? Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about in the next few slides. So ATP, think of it, remember that's the one that has the energy. In order to give off energy, what happens is it's going to lose the last phosphate. So we have 3 and it's going to lose the last one. That's how it's able to give off energy. When it loses the last one, it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. So D is 2. Okay, so in order for ATP to give off energy, it must lose its last phosphate. So these bonds that bond the 3 phosphates are going to break, and when it breaks, it releases the energy from ATP. So once it releases the energy, just like in photosynthesis that we talked about, it released the energy for the Calvin cycle, but then it returned to its unenergized form, ADP, which means only 2 phosphates, because it broke the bond to release the energy. And that's what it looks like, ADP. And that's why we wrote the equation ADP plus P, because we're going to talk about how we get it back into the energized form. Okay, so for ATP, when the bonds break, energy is released. Now, if we were only able to do that, we would never be able to get ATP back. So we actually want to form bonds so we can store energy to be used later. So for example, with the Calvin cycle and photosynthesis, we had ADP plus P. Once we form the bond, it's going to store energy. So kind of look at it this way. Let's talk about ATP because that's the first one we did. We have ATP. It's kind of like, the best way to think about this, and I'll say this in your book too, is that it's like a fully charged battery. It's ready to be used, has plenty of energy. We just need to break this bond right here, and it's going to release energy and be ready to use. ADP is more like a partially charged battery because we need to actually make a bond between the last phosphate so we can store the energy and convert it to ATP. Then we are able to use the energy. So it's not quite there yet. It's more like a partially charged battery. So here's the analogy again. ATP is a charged battery, ready to provide immediate energy. And then ADP is a used battery. It needs to recharge it before it can provide energy. And how do we do that? Okay, ADP can return to ATP by bonding with a phosphate. So that's why we write it ADP plus P. Energy to do this is provided by glucose. So when we take in glucose, we're able to do this, so that way we can start going through respiration, which we'll talk about later in the week. This picture is probably really good, and you'll probably see this somewhere on your Investigating Chemical Energy. Notice the cycle here. Okay, so when we get glucose, breakdown of organic compounds, glucose here, notice this arrow, we're able to go from ADP plus P, remember this phosphate is bonding to the other 2 phosphates so that we're storing energy, which changes it into ATP. Okay, energy to do work in our body, so this is any chemical reaction that we need. ATP is used for many, many things, mostly all the different chemical reactions that happen in our body. So when we need energy, we break off that last phosphate, return to our partially charged battery, and we use that energy for work. Okay, what is ATP used for? Active transport. We talked about that in cells. That's going against the concentration gradient. So going from an area of high concentration, or an area of low concentration to high, when you're going to the opposite, you need energy. Movement of organelles. So anytime organelles need to move, that takes energy. We use ATP. Synthesis of proteins and nucleic acids. So synthesis means to build. The building of proteins, building of nucleic acids. Basically all of your energy needs. So everything, all chemical reactions that take place in our body, ATP is a huge part of that. Alright, you have the rest of the time to work on your Investigating Chemical Energy worksheet. It does go along with these notes. If you need help, you can use the book. And also, we have, this worksheet will be due on Thursday.